Hello everyone, today Victoria Gallup and I will be speaking a little bit about ethnic identity. So first I kind of just want to cover a quick outline of what we will be covering in this presentation. So first I will discuss what ethnic identity is, and then how it's developed, and then how it differs from culture to culture. And then Victoria will talk about racial identity, and then how that is different from ethnic identity. And then in the end we will kind of give you some questions to respond to. So let's get started. Ethnic identity is defined by Meeja Smith and Gunshu as a multi-dimensional variable that refers to the psychological, relationship, attitudes, and emotional salience people attach to their ethnic group. So ethnic identities are a crucial part in the mental framework and social interactions, discursive frames, and encounters with state institutions. That's kind of a mouthful, but in other words, a person's ethnic identity will affect almost every aspect of that person's life. It is more than just an outward physical appearance, but it is what you believe and who you are inside that makes up your ethnic identity. So Nadia Sabek talks about the importance of being Slavic and how it has changed her perception of ethnic identity when she states that it defines who I am, my life values, my work ethic. It defines my childhood and my life experiences being brought up in a Slavic home. So this quote just shows that there are a lot of factors that change your ethnic identity, and we will talk about those a bit in the next slide. So next we will talk about how ethnic identity is developed. So there are two theories that have been promoted in the development of a person's ethnic identity. First is the social identity theory, which social identity refers to that part of an individual's sense of identity that comes from belonging to a particular group, and is the line of interaction between personal and group identity. Alexander Haslam kind of adds to this explanation when he states that this framework seeks to explain how a social behavior is structured not merely by a people's sense of themselves as individuals, but also by their sense as members in a social group. So in other words, your identity is kind of changed by that which your group is, and it's whatever your group is can have an effect on who you are. The next theory would be the developmental theory, which can be basically stated as adapting to a new environment. So as the presence of an environmental factor increases, the system behavior changes linearly in response to it. That's, once again, a mouthful, but it kind of states that once your environment changes, you tend to change with it, and that can easily be seen in today's society. So these two theories kind of represent an aspect that have the ability, or the aspects that have the ability to affect how a person's identity can be developed. Now we will look at how ethnic identity can kind of differ from culture to culture. But for starters, I want to talk a little bit about how ethnic identity can be measured, because that will have a lot to do with the different cultures as well. So ethnic identity can be measured using three different variables. First is exploration, which is the degree to which individuals have explored their own identity. Next is resolution, which is the degree to which individuals have resolved their ethnic identity and what it means to them. And then lastly is affirmation or effect, which is the level of effect, positive or negative, that individuals associate with the resolution. So because ethnic identity strongly depends on a person's beliefs and who they are, each culture will have a different ethnic identity. So for this project, I was lucky enough to get to interview my aunt, and due to location restrictions and difficulties, I wasn't able to interview her in person, but I was able to kind of email back and forth with her and talk with her a lot about this. So I won't be able to show you physically my interview, but I will have some quotes that could kind of help clear some of these PowerPoints and issues. So my aunt was raised in a Canadian-Hungarian background, but then in her 30s she was married into a Mexican family. So she stated, since being married, my ethnic identity has evolved. I still hold on to a lot of the morals I grew up with, but now I practice a new religion and have a lot of new traditions. So this goes to show that ethnic identity can change kind of anytime, like just depending on how you change yourself. So I believe that my aunt was affected by both the social identity theory and the developmental theory because she was placed in a new group of people, which had a huge effect on her, as well as a new environment, which also allowed her ethnic identity to evolve.
So, what is racial identity? Racial identity is something that people aren't in control of. It's controlled by genetics, it's inherited by their parents, and it's something that one cannot change because it is who they are. Like, nobody can change their race. Um, Racial identity is more based on external or physical appearances, such as skin color, hair texture, certain facial features. Um, and with this comes a lot of emphasis on interracial relationships, and how people of different races tend to interact with each other. Um, People definitely sometimes connect external appearances with these preconceived ideas of race. So sometimes there's a lot of racial segregations or just ideas that people have about this one group of race that usually aren't true for all of the people of that race because that's a lot of stereotyping. But people can just have this mindset about people of who are unlike them, and that can cause a barrier in relationships. So, for example, like in our American culture, there's a many people who are American and like follow the American culture, but there's also many different races to our in our American society. So, how is racial identity different from ethnic identity? So, as I said before, racial identity cannot be changed. However, ethnic identity can change based on where someone has grown up or the group to which they belong. So, a quote that was really good for explaining this is how ethnic identity is defined as one sense of belonging to a specific self identified ethnic group. So, a lot of ethnic, like an ethnicity, is just like they feel very like they belong to this culture, they've grown up in this culture, they spent a significant time in this area. So, um, something that I thought really related to this is how missionaries could be a good example of how race can be separate from culture. Um, I know a missionary couple and they grew up in America and then they ended up going to Mali, which is in West Africa, and they've spent at least 10, 15 years there so far, and they've raised their two kids there, and their kids were born in that country, and they continue to grow up. So even though they were originally white Americans, they really have picked up that culture, and I think that can now be a part of their ethnic identity because they wear the dress of the people, the Malians, like the women or the mother and daughter wear the head wraps, and then the father and son, and all of them wear the dresses that they wear. Not all the time, but often when they're just going around town and such. Um, and then they live amongst them. They live in the same huts as them, and they just are very intentional with their relationships with their neighbors. They're very immersed in the culture, and the kids grew up there, and I think that that is a really important part of the kids' ethnic identity. So that's separate from their race because obviously they're white and they're not part of the African race, but they share the same ethnic identity. Um, for I had an interview with one of my friends, and he says he identifies as Latino, but he believes that his ethnic identity is like a part of how he thinks or feels that he's a part of, like which culture he feels he's the closest to. And I asked him if, since moving to a different, like moving locations or moving to college, which was different from where he grew up because he goes to Trinity now and he grew up in Chicago. He said that his worldview definitely has changed, and like his way of thinking towards cultures and like his terminology of the culture he lives in has changed since he moved to college. And then I asked how he thought his ethnic identity would affect his future vocation, and he thinks that it definitely will be a positive factor because it'll help him relate to people who are maybe of his ethnic identity or ethnic, right, his ethnic identity, and then more than people that might not be of their ethnic identity. And I also believe that outsiders can partake in ethnic culture. Um, so, Personal Connection is an Indian restaurant that I went to a few months ago. This is a very authentic Indian cuisine. Here's a little video. This is the where it was. As you can see, they had like this the swirls and like the trellises and such. Um, and I didn't take these pictures, but these were pictures that very accurately represented um, the food and the culture. For example, that's some of the dishes that we had because it was a buffet. Like they had a lot of what was it? It was just very authentic food, and they had like masala and pakora and naan bread. Um, it was very a lot of it was gluten free, which my friend was gluten free, so we went there. A lot of curry and squash, and then they had these little rice balls, which were cinnamon and sugar, and they were very good. I just thought it was authentic, and people went there that were not Indian, even though it was all owned by people who were Indian. But by doing this, people were open to like the different examples that um, people had of their culture, so they could be more open to people of other cultures.
All right, so now that our presentation's kind of over, we just wanted to give you some questions for response. So after listening to this presentation, how do you see your own ethnic identity? And how do you think that you could be more aware of this ethnic identity? Also, what is your own interpretation of the difference between race and ethnicity? Thank you. So here are references.